on the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you're with us tonight. Important conversation we are going to have. We're talking about gun laws and gun violence in Tennessee. Want to hear from you. Happy to have with us our guest, Beth Joslin Roth with the Safe Tennessee Project. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Safe Tennessee Project. What is that? In a brief explanation, what is Safe Tennessee Project?
We are a gun violence prevention nonprofit made up of academics and physicians and researchers focused on reducing gun violence here in Tennessee.
Focused on reducing gun violence. The legislative session is getting started right
Today.
now. You'll be up there, right?
Yes.
You're always up there. What do you think about the start of this session? Guns always, it seems like, there's several bills. What do you think about this session?
Well, we're watching every day to see what type of legislation will be filed. In addition to what was held over from last session. The only new piece of legislation that I know of so far that's been filed is a bill to basically allow people to carry loaded guns in public without permits. We would refer to that as a permitless carry bill. So that's concerning to us, but we wait to see what else is going to come down the pike. We have heard some rumors of some other things that might be filed, but we're waiting to see.
How would you characterize the last, let's say, 5 years? Have gun laws been strengthened or weakened?
There has been a systematic loosening of our state's gun laws over the last 4 or 5 years, really over about the last decade. There has been no strengthening of the laws, just loosening in terms of who can carry guns and where they can be carried.
And what do you think is the result of that? Are we safer or are we less safe?
Well, when you look at the data would say that we are less safe. What we know is that, for example, since 2010, firearm homicides in Tennessee have gone up 58%. Since 2010, youth firearm homicides have gone up 115%. Those are numbers that we find very concerning. Unintentional shooting injuries have gone up 84%. So there's certainly a lack of responsibility, unfortunately, with some gun owners. And what we see is that these laws, as they have been loosened, there is a correlating rise in gun deaths.
And what do you see? How does Tennessee stack up against other states? Because again, we have people on the other side on this show on a fairly regular basis, and they say it's people's right, and good people with a gun can make things more safe, and the things that we have often heard. And they say other states are more permissive when it comes to gun laws, and that we need to keep, I guess, lessening these laws. They keep pushing in that direction. How do we rate with other states?
So based on 2017 data, which is the most recent data that we have, Tennessee is 11th in the country for firearm mortality. We are 7th for firearm homicide. We are 4th for both youth gun death and youth gun homicide. We are 5th for women murdered by men, most often with firearms and almost always by a man that they know. So basically, Tennessee is one of the worst states in the country for gun violence.
And so when you go up to the legislature, what is your goal? Are you trying to push back some of these recently enacted laws? Are you actually pushing legislation yourself? And if so, what is your goal when you go up to the legislature?
So a lot of what we're trying to do is educate and provide information to lawmakers in hopes that they would make more informed policy decisions. We certainly play defense on a lot of legislation when we see legislation being filed and being pushed that we feel will make our state less safe. We push back against that, and we do that by trying to educate lawmakers about the result of passing similar laws in other states and what the results have been. we just try and explain to them why we believe that legislation would be not in the best interest of public safety here in Tennessee. We also file what we would call offense bills, which are bills that would strengthen gun laws. We have pushed for the last several years to follow through with what the vast majority of Tennesseans, around 83% of Tennesseans, support expanding background checks to cover all gun sales, including those between private individuals. We have pushed for the last several years to enact Michaela's Law, which would be child access prevention legislation that would hold adult gun owners responsible if their choice to leave a loaded firearm accessible to a child under 13 resulted in a child picking up that gun and injuring or killing themselves or someone else. We last year worked very hard to strengthen some of our domestic violence laws in relation to firearms. Unfortunately, we were not able to get that bill out of committee. It was discouraging considering the fact that Tennessee has been one of the top 10 states for domestic violence homicides for the last decade. And then we also, for the last several years and this year as well, will be working on extreme risk protection order legislation, which is legislation that would allow an immediate family member or a member of law enforcement who believe a person is an imminent risk to themselves or others. It would allow that person to petition a judge to temporarily remove firearms from that person until that time of crisis has passed.
Some other states have enacted that.
Yes.
What's that called? That's called?
We call it extreme risk protection orders. More colloquially, it's known as red flag laws.
Right, the red flag laws, right.
And the way that those are written, they essentially mirror the existing domestic violence protection order statutes. That's why it's important that each state sort of create their own extreme risk protection legislation, because it mirrors what the state already has on their own books in terms of domestic violence protection orders or orders of protection.
We can talk more about those laws, that law proposal in a little bit. Something that we've talked about on this show is here in Davidson County, Metro Police talk about people leave their cars unlocked, and then there are guns that are stolen from these cars, either just out of the cars or the cars themselves are stolen, and then the guns are missing.
Right.
Is there some way, and this is a question that gets asked on this show a lot, is there some way to hold accountable someone who leaves a gun unlocked in their car and then that gun winds up in the hands of somebody bad? Or, is that not appropriate? What is being discussed about that?
Well, that is certainly something that comes up quite a bit, and really one of the key groups that's driving those conversations is law enforcement. Law enforcement feels very strongly about this because they are the ones that are left dealing with the aftermath of these, I would describe what this reckless behavior of leaving loaded guns in unlocked cars, oftentimes visible from outside the vehicle. As you mentioned, just here in Nashville, we have seen a 370% increase in the number of guns stolen out of cars since 2012. And what we know is that those guns often end up in the hands of young people. In terms of legislation to address that, legislation has been brought up the last several years, again, often brought by law enforcement to legislators. The legislation has looked sometimes like requiring guns to be safely secured in firearms if there are children in the vehicle, requiring the guns to be locked in a glove box or a console. But again, that legislation has failed to move out of committee in the last several years that it's been filed. Now, what's really interesting about that is all of that goes back to legislation that was passed in 2013 that was referred to as guns in trunks, which allows people to store guns in their vehicle even if the vehicle is parked on property that prohibits firearms. It was very controversial legislation at the time because business owners felt that it usurped their rights to prohibit firearms on their property. But when that legislation was written, there actually is language in the legislation that dictates how the firearms are supposed to be stored. And what I find frustrating is that, the people who are making these these choices to leave their guns in their car are actually, neither responsible gun owners nor are they law-abiding, because they're actually not following the law. That legislation that's the law now, that you can keep guns in your cars. What we would say is, can we just make it a requirement and hold people responsible if they do not lock the gun in a console, if they don't lock it in a glove box, or if they don't lock it in some type of a safe? There are actually safes that are designed to go into cars. So there are many ways that people could responsibly store their guns in their vehicles. And if they're not going to do that, they should be held accountable. Another option that's out there, should anybody wish to pursue it, is there is a possibility that someone could file a civil lawsuit against a gun owner who left a loaded gun in an unlocked car. If that gun ended up being used to injure or kill someone, that person who was injured or the family of someone who was killed could theoretically bring a civil lawsuit against the gun owner.
That is something, I guess, the gun lobby is opposed to, as far as more accountability when it comes to that kind of thing. They're opposed to a lot of bills that would strengthen gun laws. They again are pushing back, trying to loosen gun laws, saying it's a right and that kind of thing. You've been up there at the legislature for a few years. Do you think the gun lobby's power is increasing? Is it waning? Is it staying the same? I mean, we hear these statistics about a majority of people, huge majority, support background checks, yet that doesn't pass. These things where these polls show huge numbers of people support things, and yet there's no movement whatsoever in the legislature. Where do you see the power of the gun lobby? What is the disparity there, and is it increasing, decreasing, staying the same?
I think that right now what we're seeing is, to some degree, the power of the gun lobby decreasing. Anyone who's been following the news for the last couple of years has seen that the NRA is facing some internal issues as well as external. They're involved in a number of lawsuits right now. Internally, there has been a huge shakeup. The director of the NRA's Institute for Legislative Affairs, his name is Chris Cox. He's actually from Tennessee, and he headed up the NRA ILA, the Institute for Legislative Affairs, for years, and he left, I believe it was last year. So there is a lot of internal turmoil going on. I think that between some of that internal turmoil, some of these lawsuits, and the fact that there are more and more people, especially young people, speaking out about the need for stronger gun laws, I think that they are sort of, that their power is waning. Now, that being said, this is Tennessee. I don't think that we're under any illusion that the gun lobby does not still hold a lot of power here, because it absolutely does. In fact, it's probably one of the, if not the most powerful lobbying organization in the Tennessee General Assembly. But I'm confident that that won't always be the case.
When I talk to people that are on the gun side, Tennessee Firearms Association, others, what they say is their worry is if they give an inch, they lose a mile. So they don't want to give an inch. In fact, they want to stay on the offensive. There is no trust in government on their side, and they believe if they allow something like more accountability for gun owners if they leave a gun in an unlocked car, or certainly background checks, then the next thing from those who want more gun protection would be to essentially try and take their guns away. Essentially, you give an inch, you lose a mile. How do you encounter that line of thinking in the legislature, and what do you say about that?
Well, yeah, we definitely encounter that. That's certainly something that we hear quite a bit in the legislature and just in the general public. But essentially that's a straw man argument. That's actually not what what any of this type of legislation would really do. And a lot of that rhetoric is, for lack of a better term, it's fear mongering. It's trying to create fear with gun owners that by enacting basic legislation like expanding background checks, doing more to prevent guns from getting into the hands of convicted domestic abusers, for example, that those are not steps towards taking guns away from every gun owner. They're just not, and it's frustrating that we're constantly up against that type of straw man argument. There were looking at the issue from through a public health lens. You can look at something like car accidents. So for years, there were no speed limits. People didn't have to, or the speed limits were very high. People did not have to wear safety belts. We did not have DUI laws, things of those natures. We didn't have strong technology that prevented children from being injured. There weren't car seat requirements. And what happened over time was that by studying the issue, we were able to reduce gun deaths by requiring seat belts, by enacting speed limits, by requiring people to secure children in car seats, by studying how to make cars safer, how to make car seats safer. And we were able to do all of that without banning cars, without telling people they can't ever have a drink of alcohol, without telling people that they can't transport children in vehicles. So, this idea that everything is an incremental march towards gun confiscation, it's just not true, and that's just not how public policy, or certainly public health, that's just not how it works.
Let's take a couple calls before we go to break here. And if you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Let's go to Chris, who has waited here. Hello, Chris.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Hey, how y'all doing tonight?
Doing well.
Okay, so I'm going to plead ignorance because I just turned the TV on and clicked to your channel and saw your show. First of all, no, I do not believe. First of all, let me say that I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. However, yes, I actually do agree that people that are ignorant and stupid enough to leave their gun in an unlocked car should be punished. No different than a parent should be punished for leaving their weapon unlocked or unsecured in their house and a child gets shot with it. So, but it's not a public health crisis.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it's not a public health crisis. I was recently in Pennsylvania for some training, and I heard on the news up there that Vermont is trying to enact a law to ban cell phones for people below the age of 21, make it illegal, kind of like drinking alcohol.
Right.
If we just enforce the laws that are on the books, we wouldn't need another law to ban cell phones for those that are under 21. Tennessee enacted that. Now, let me preface what I'm saying with that I love the state of Tennessee and I love my home. However, last July, we enacted we enacted a hands-free policy for cell phones, did we not?
That's right, right.
Yet I have not heard nor seen much enforcement of that. So we don't need any more laws. We just need to enforce the ones that are on the book.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chris, thank you for that. And that's something we hear. We don't need more laws. We need to enforce the laws on the book. In fact, what you were saying, you're saying with the guns in trunks, there is a law that talks about it allows it, but then it says the guns should be stored in a certain way. What is the penalty if they don't? Because here's Chris saying, strong supporter of the Second Amendment, but if somebody leaves a gun in an unlocked car, that person should be held responsible. I guess how are they held responsible? What is it? A misdemeanor? A felony? What is it?
Well, I mean, that would be up to lawmakers and how they chose to draft the legislation. I mean, I think a misdemeanor would be sufficient. I mean, the idea behind really any type of legislation like this is to create a deterrent, to make people think twice about how they store their guns if they know that if their gun gets stolen and, they could be charged with a crime.
All right, yeah, we need to enforce the laws on the books. I'll have you answer more of that when we come back. We have to take a break.
Sure.
Bob, Evan, Jim, others, hold on the line. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.